Welcome everyone to our webinar on getting started with Privado's privacy engineering platform. I'm V. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado. On today's agenda, there are a couple of things I wanted to touch upon. So over the last year or so, we've been doing a lot of webinars around privacy and engineering on, there's this gap between the two on how privacy operates, how engineering operates. And in fact, we did this summit end of January, which was Bridge Summit to help you bridge that gap. So we got a lot of insight from people like you in terms of what the gap is. So we're going to first start with, hey, what's the problem looking like? If you are running a privacy program, if you're trying to mature it, what's the gap that exists from an engineering perspective when you're looking at your product and engineering teams? We'll also go into a couple of use cases for Privado and for maturing a privacy program. That would be how to do data mapping for engineering well, privacy by design, how can you make it more programmatic, so not only relying on assessments, and how can you enable developers, right? So making privacy available as a service, something which works always for engineers rather than, something that they have to come to you or you have to kind of, keep chasing them. So how do you enable developers? So these will be the three broad themes on how do you get visibility or data mapping done? How do you get governance, which is more programmatic, and how do you collaborate with the engineers better? How do you enable them? Perfect. So kind of, if you are a company which has a lot of software engineers, and I'm assuming that's how kind of you are on today's webinar, you would see as you're trying to talk to them or as you're trying to figure out from a privacy risk perspective, what's happening on the product and engineering side, you will see there are broadly three gaps that exist there. There's a visibility gap, which is what data do I collect from my products? Where do they flow? There's a governance gap, which is your engineers are shipping product at a breakthrough speed. They are innovating new technologies like OpenAI, and privacy is not pulled into each of these discussions. And, that leads to fines or breaches down the line. And finally, enablement, as a privacy function, everyone started with a compliance floor, right? So we had GDPR, we had CPRA, but as privacy programs are maturing, it's about efficiency. It's about how can you enable an engineer to do privacy on their own? How can you build tooling? How can you build processes around these three? So we see basically these three gaps when you're maturing a privacy program for engineering and trying to make sure, your products your engineers are building are compliant and don't lead to breaches. And if you kind of go one level into each one of them, these are the things that we've heard from our customers, peers in the industry on webinars. If you look at visibility, the data maps are still manual, they're inaccurate, they're incomplete. It takes forever to create them, 6 to 12 months, and then you have to refresh every year, right? So if from the EU side, I saw a couple of people joining, if you're doing documentation for ROPAs, or if, you are in the CPRA regime and for you, the main use cases around DSAR, they do take a lot of time. So think of the privacy program and everyone is like, hey, data map is the foundation of a privacy program, or visibility is the foundation of a privacy program. From a gap perspective, this is pretty manual today as well, and it's very inaccurate. And there are some fundamental reasons for that. We'll get into that as well in the next few slides. So that's number one. How do I get better at visibility? That's something you learn in today's webinar. So that's the first big gap we see. The second big gap we see is governance, right? As privacy officers, as privacy leaders, as privacy practitioners, you are supposed to make some privacy assurances to your end customers, right? They could be your consumers if you're a B2C company, and that will be in a privacy policy. If you are a B2B company, then you're signing data protection agreements. So you're giving some assurances there. Or, if there is a regulator asking you certain questions, you're definitely representing and saying, this is what we do with data, right? Based on your understanding. So while you're making all these promises, think of the engineer who's building the product. They never get that context. And so from your vantage point, there's this gap where you have to make these promises in a centralized way. But when your engineers are building product or your product managers are building features, they don't get that context. So that governance which is being sent on a top level is not going to the end, user who's actually building the product. Other things, like the other extreme I've kind of seen in conversation is like too many assessments can definitely slow down the product development as well. And that also increases the burden on small or privacy teams, which are anyway small, right? And the flip side of that is maybe you don't see everything which is happening, right? And then you could lead to changes that are not reviewed, and that could lead to privacy issues. So I would say governance is a pretty interesting gap because you can take it on either extreme. You can start doing a lot of assessments and that could slow down things. Or if you're doing too few assessments, then you're missing on things. So finding that balance, how do you do that is basically a key thing. And we'll tackle that theme as well in today. The final gap that we see between when privacy and engineering teams are working together is enablement, right? I think this is the most constant thing I've heard is like, it almost feels like both teams have different languages, right? I mean, we are trying to work around a prescriptive law like GDPR or CPRA, whereas engineers are working in specs and product requirement documents, right? So there's that translation problem. There's another big problem is like, if you look at it from a security org perspective, your peers in security, they have for every product, they have a risk catalog assigned, and that rolls up to an engineering leader and a product leader, right? So from an accountability perspective, right now in your company, someone owns a security vulnerability in a product built by an engineer, but it's very tough to do that for privacy. If you can't do that for privacy, then from an accountability perspective, nobody owns that risk, right? It's basically just you owning the risk. However, you never created the risk, right? So from an enablement perspective, if we can convert our findings into, hey, here is a product privacy risk catalog. This is the person who owns the product. This is the engineering leader who owns the product. You actually enable them because they then know we have to take care of these risks before we go live or within certain time frame. I would say like the last on enablement is, you can end up doing a lot of assessments and open up risks. But the most important piece is, are you putting tickets on Jira that your engineers are picking and resolving? Because that's when privacy gets implemented, your risks go down and you add controls as well. I'm going to take a pause and see if there are any questions. Okay, there's one interesting one, which I'm going to pick later. Perfect. So we kind of look at from a privacy program perspective, what are the gaps that you can see? Again, visibility, governance, and enablement. Let's kind of look at from a data lifecycle perspective, right? If you're looking at your data in your company, typically what you're doing is you're starting from the right. You are going and saying, show me all my databases. I'm going to scan all of them. I'm going to scan my data warehouse and figure out what data I have and where it lives, right? That's basically this last bucket on the right, the data layer on the extreme right. If you have used a data discovery tool, if you've built a data discovery tool, or if you have evaluated a data discovery tool, this is the last part where you're trying to get visibility into. But if you think about the journey of data, it typically starts from the left. You have a mobile app, a website, you could have a wearable, you could have like a card, you could have a TV app. All of these user-facing interfaces collect customer data. Then it flows to your internal code, which is these microservices or features. And that actually processes the data and pushes to the data layer, right? So the problem is a lot of privacy risks exist in data collection, data use, purpose limitation, and your engineers spend most of the time on the first two buckets, and you end up focusing only on the data. So from a privacy program perspective, the source code, which is responsible for collecting, sharing, storing, processing, transforming data, you don't have any visibility there, right? And that's why when we say your data maps are out of date, the reason they're out of date is because this picture doesn't exist there. You only can know I have email in a database, but you don't know how that email came there and how it is being used. What's the purpose? How the processing is happening. And that's like the biggest gap we've seen in the marketplace. And these are kind of symptoms, again, you might see in your org when you're are you doing a data mapping exercise or trying to generate a record of processing activity, register ROPA reports. Like the first one you'll see is like, you might have thousands of engineers or hundreds of engineers, and to just define these processing activities is a very manual and time consuming process. All right. So an example, right? When I started Privado, I actually started by doing a manual assessment. I ended up interviewing about 100 product managers and about 100 engineering leaders to figure out what data that they have. And the biggest pain point was like interviewing them and figuring out what's even a processing activity. For them, that's a concept that does not exist, like a processing activity. So it's very difficult to make one. And that takes a lot of time. And it's kind of very opposite to how engineers are building product. They're thinking in terms of applications they're building, and we're talking in terms of business process. And both of them don't go well together in most cases. So that's the first thing you'll see is this is very manual and time consuming and very ad hoc. The second thing you'll see is because the person who built the product might have gone or they don't remember, these are usually inaccurate and incomplete. And finally, the biggest pain point is with all the efforts you might end up pulling in, like 6 to 12 months in generating these ROPAs, they're static, they're point in time. And, 1 in 3 organizations are, 2 in 3 organizations are shipping product at least once a month, which means they go out of date with every, with the new weekly product releases as well. So these are the 3 pain points you'll see from a data mapping and ROPA perspective in your org. And the main difference that Privado brings to the table is instead of spending, 12, 18 months just in gathering data, this could be via assessments, or if you are utilizing a data discovery technology and integrations, you can pretty much get all the visibility in Privado in under 3 days. If you are using our cloud platform, within 10 minutes. If you're using our on-prem platform, that's a little bit more time. So under 3 days, you get complete visibility into all the products you have, what data they collect, what data they share, what's the risk. And the main advantage for you as a privacy leader is once you have all the data, then your team can really focus on high level things, which are risk mitigation, setting up the right policies, helping do governance better, helping do enablement better. Right now, most of the privacy team end up spending time in just gathering data and not remediating stuff. And that's kind of the advantage you get with Privado. And that's the premise of a code scanning technology like ours. Any privacy code scanning technology will give you the same advantage is integration time and giving you visibility is super fast. Within 3 days, you get the visibility. It's early. It's single point of integration, does not require engineering efforts. So you can go live without disturbing your ecosystem within the company. And it's basically proactive. Before things go live, you have an automated check, which is looking for things, right? So privacy code scanning will give you advantages across the 3 gaps that you might have in your privacy program on visibility, governance, and enablement as well. And essentially, this is how Privado works. Privado is a privacy code scanning solution. It will connect with your source code management tools like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. These are systems where your company is maintaining the source code. Everything is version controlled. So Privado integrates there. Single point of integration, again, for our cloud customer, within 5 minutes, we go live and start to show you data. And what do we give you as an output? We discover and classify person data. We figure out all entry and exit points of data. With that, we build a global view of data flows, help you govern third-party sharing, help you automate data mapping, generate ROPA reports, do privacy by design better, all of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to the product and give you a little bit of flavor of what it means to do data mapping for engineering with Privado and what is the kind of output you can expect. So what you see in here is with Privado, once we do the scan, you see flows of data and data inventory to all data stores, third-party apps. You cover mobile app, APIs, logs, everything. Yeah. And a big difference from a data mapping automation perspective is your data maps will become automated and on demand. You will go from a place where you have to ask people about data or stop them for integration or wait for an integration to a point where it is available within minutes to you. It's on one-click integration. You don't have to ask any question to anyone, and there are no engineering efforts, right? So from a value perspective, the moment you integrate Privado, you get this data map. That's actually the biggest advantage of a privacy code scanning solution like Privado as well. The second is you get a source of truth, which is generated from the code. There's no interpretation. There is no manual input. You get it right from the code as it was written by the engineer. And the third biggest advantage is this will save a lot of labor hours of your team, both on the product side, engineering side, and the privacy side. It is dynamic. Whenever someone changes a code, let's say adds a new third party, our product automatically rescans it, automatically updates the report, updates the data map, updates the ROPA report, creates a new risk. And basically your data maps are put on autopilot on your behalf because of code scanning. So these are the 3 things from an advantage perspective you'll see. I'm going to focus on that, move to the demo and look at that as the first thing. I know there are a bunch of questions, so I'm going to make sure I address those as well. All right. Okay. So there are 2 great questions. I'm going to actually address them both. There's one around when the app is live and data feeds are more exposed. Perfect. And then also, privacy by design. So Anush, that's the next section. So we're going to focus on that as well. Cool. Perfect. So if you can see my screen still, this is how the Privado platform looks like. I'm going to focus on the first aspect, which is data mapping. What you can see here is I've connected our source code management tool and we there's some scans running. So you'll see the results of that. I'm going to start from a view, which is data inventory as the starting point for you. So think of it today. The question to answer that we were kind of discussing was what data I have and what happens to the data. That's like the fundamental visibility question you're trying to ask. With Privado, this is available to you on demand. The moment we run the scan, finish the scan, you have a view where you have all the data elements, all the third parties, all databases, all APIs connected to your products. And then it's building you, giving you some more insights on where the third parties are, what the top data categories are. But if we start from the first view, which is the list of data elements, this is kind of, from a org perspective where you can look at and see what's happening. So all these data elements are discovered out of the box. There's no work you have to do. Everything is categorized. There's a category, sensitivity, and you also will see in Privado these tags. For example, SSN has a CPRA sensitive tag. And then there will be some GDPR sensitive tag. There'll be tags for PCI, HIPAA, my health, my data, so on and so forth. So there is this nice data category and classification system in Privado, which is completely out of the box, completely configurable as well. Now, once you have that, you can then kind of start, digging in. So for example, let's say if you're an e-commerce company and, for you order details is something which is important and you want to prevent the sprawl of it, you come to Privado. First, you see the list and you say, hey, show me the data flow for order details. And you just click here and it's going to do that for you. So it's going to say, hey, in your products that Privado has scanned, order detail is being shared with 7 third parties. It's being stored in a couple of databases. And there are some logs in which you are writing order details as well. And it's super easy for us to investigate further. You can say, hey, I want to figure out who's responsible for sending order details to Facebook. And if you click here, it will show you the exact product in your org, which is doing it. And we can actually double down on this later. And I can also show you how that happens, right? This is kind of the view where you get a data flow diagram of a specific data element. And we looked at order details. You could look at email and things start to go crazier because, there's a big sprawl of email as well. And the same view you can do for third parties. Now, if you are trying to scan third parties using a data discovery tool, most of them don't offer any APIs. You can't scan a TikTok to figure out what data is going to TikTok. But in Privado, you can. For example, let me show you. We discovered a third party called TikTok, and you want to figure out what data is my product, my website, my app sending TikTok. If you click here, it will show you the exact data element. So for example, in this instance, search history and purchase history is being shared with TikTok. So that's one example. Another one which keeps coming is if you are a company which has started to integrate OpenAI in your products, there's no way for you to scan OpenAI, but with code scanning, because we know the OpenAI gets integrated in your product, and with our analysis, we can show you what data is being shared to OpenAI. So in this case, email address, right? So the same thing exists for, data elements, third parties. We can go in a database view and say, hey, we know there's a database called known database and what data is going in, what data is coming out from it. It gives you a complete picture. So think of data inventory as the starting place where you have a list of data, a list of third party, list of database from an inventory view, right? So this gives you visibility that you never had, or for which you had to wait, for which you had to refresh every year. Now, from a tactical thing, from Europe, one thing you want to do is do things like a ROPA report, right? So I'm going to take one example and dig deep. So this is the middle layer, which is this features that your companies are building. They get organized into something called microservices. And this is an example of it. So think of this like a backend feature that your company has built. What Privado is able to do is once we look at the scan result, you see first it builds a data flow diagram of it. So it says, we know Privado Accounts API has some third party, which is SendGrid and Slack, has a database connection. There's some connection points. And then it also gives a essential tag, like who owns the repository. So if you want to do an assessment, we can do that very easily. The next thing you'll see, which is unique functionality of Privado of our platform, is for ROPA reports, you also want to map our application to processing activity, and we generate that. So for example, anyone in the privacy team can go into Privado and see and they get a view of what the product really does. So for example, this product is responsible for a processing activity called user account management. And you can read the description. It says it handles user account creation, login, email, Slack notification, also, event sending functionalities. So you go from a place where you don't have the visibility on data to a place where you have the visibility on data, but you're also able to extract and see the purpose of processing, the processing activity itself, all automatically in Privado. With this, about 80% of the ROPA report gets automated, and then you can jump in and start to see the results better, right? So for example, last we were looking at was data elements and everything on a global view. Once you come in, you can see for a specific product, for a specific application, the data flow diagram as well. So here's what, for example, you see for email address, right? Email address comes into the system from two API endpoints, /authenticate/sign up, gets to SendGrid, Slack, and goes to a database. All of this is automatic. All of this is driven by our code scan. Now, once you get this picture, probably for the privacy artifacts, this is already enough. But to enable your engineers or to make your life easier, we also have a code analysis tab. Now, this tab is super easy for the engineers. When you say, hey, we know you're sending email to Slack or SendGrid, there is a line-by-line proof on how we discovered it. So for an engineer, this is very easy because they can just log in and see the flow and say, yep, we are definitely sharing email with Slack. And if you have to fix it, this is the line where we need to fix it. We need to remove the flow to fix a privacy issue. So think of data flow as, a requirement or a feature that helps you comply better. And think of code analysis, which makes it easier for you to communicate to engineers because they can see the code responsible for a certain data breach, data leak, or a general data processing as well. So yeah, so from a data mapping perspective, which was kind of our focus for the first half of the demo, what you can see in Privado is, once we run the scan, you get this complete view of data inventory, which is up to date, automatic, it's kind of clean, it runs on its own. Second, once we go in to generate things like a ROPA report, not only you get the data flow diagram, but we also generate these processing activities. And finally, you get this nice list of data elements, data flow diagram with a line-by-line proof of how a certain flow started, where it went. Now, I'm going to take Frank's question. The question was around how does it work when the app is live and the data feeds are on, which is the most expected situation? Yes. So the question is like, what happens is, let's say there's a website, you add a pixel and or SDK and there's data flowing. How do you figure it out? That's the interesting piece with Privado is because an engineer will deliberately write code always for that to happen. We're able to pick that up. I'm going to take an example of a different kind of function repository. The last one we see was more backend. So your users would have never seen it, but it was processing a lot of data. In this case, this is a mobile app, right? And in this case, what you will see is illness or medical condition is being shared with Facebook, Google Firebase, and AdMob. So to Frank, whenever the app runs, we know for sure that there is a data element called illness or medical condition, which was because there is drug information being processed. And it is flowing to, if you look at the last step, which is Google AdMob. So what happens is whenever someone is writing an application, they write this business logic and Privado discovers this business logic to find these data flows. And we just find it when engineers are writing code. So you don't need to run the application to figure this out. You can just do it as engineers write code, which means before a breach happens, you can prevent it. Before someone adds a new pixel, you can prevent it. So that's the advantage of a code scanning tool is you don't have to firefight always. You can proactively discover issues and prevent them from going to production and prevent these data breaches which would happen. I hope that answers your question, Frank. If not, feel free to add follow-up questions as well. Perfect. So this was another kind of example where we were looking at a mobile app. And finally, to conclude, another example, here is a website, right? So you'll see the data flow diagram differs from application to application. So when we were looking at backend, it was databases. When we are looking at a website or a mobile app, it was SDK. When we are looking at a website, it's, as you can see, it's cookies, it's tag managers, it's pixels like TikTok, Facebook, right? And then when you look at the collection, you'll see something different. So for example, here you'll see there is a user form called account form, and we're picking that up. So Privado really will discover all privacy issues from source of data, which is user forms, app permissions, sharing of data, storage of data, internal processing, everything. So we make your life easier by analyzing code and converting it into the privacy artifacts we need to generate. So yeah, that was kind of the first part of the demo. I'm going to go back and focus on the second big piece, which is privacy by design. And Anush, hopefully that I'll be able to pick up and answer your question as well with that. Perfect. So yeah, privacy by design, of course, we've been doing it since GDPR and even before that. But the key context is that as companies are building new features, you will do an assessment to review it, probably like a threshold assessment, which could lead to a privacy impact assessment, or in some cases, a data protection impact assessment as well. What we've seen is like sometimes that leads to response choice between, do I get high speed or low risk? Kind of as a company, what we've seen is you could be on the spectrum of saying either we're going to review all changes, anything that is being built in the company is going to go through a privacy process. And that happens with certain companies, especially, depending on the maturity or if they have certain consent degree in the US or being fined in the Europe. And they are like, they have to review everything, right? What happens there is if someone has to sign off on everything, the speed of innovation suffer, the speed of development suffer, right? That's typically an argument. On the other hand, you could also be in a space where you are reviewing only planned things. So, only planned products or things reach to you when people reach out to you. And from a maturity perspective, you have really high speed, but you also leave a lot of risk on the table. And probably organizations are not on these extremes. They're somewhere in the middle of this graph, right? Wherever you are on this graph, what I want to make sure you understand is privacy code scanning technology will not disturb the risk. So imagine if you are somewhere in the high speed, medium risk scenario or medium speed, medium risk scenario, if that's an acceptable speed to you, you can reduce the risk at the same speed with a privacy code scanning solution. And the reason you can do that is because while you're doing your assessment for the planned thing, it's kind of like you do penetration testing in security or a security threat modeling, but then you run the code against security scanner to find vulnerabilities. The Privado is exactly the same. So while you will continue to do your privacy impact assessment, Privado will be your automated test. It will automatically check for things you missed because nobody told you, or if the assessment scope had changed by the time you went from design to coding to production. So think of us as like an automated check on behalf of you, which is continuously running and finding any deviations. So in real life, how could this look like? I'm going to talk about that as well. But think of your privacy by design and making it more programmatic, making it more bot-like. What Privado can enable is three things: continuously, make it more continuous. So every code change which is happening, any new software change goes through us and we compare it to the policies, your agreements, your privacy policy, your assessments you have done, and make sure it's exactly the same you did the documentation earlier. It helps you protect data, so prevent data breaches. So things like if there's a data leak, there's a sensitive data sharing, there's a third party sharing, there's some pixel data sharing, all of that can be prevented, and then make your reports dynamic, right? So whenever a new third party gets added, automatically update the ROPA or change the location when that has happened, right? So from a maturity perspective, you go from privacy by design process, which becomes really, really programmatic. There's kind of like a bot which is supporting your program and helping you mature it as well. And in reality, this is how it could look like. So this is like a sample SDLC process where the green is kind of where you might be doing the assessments as of today. So whenever there's a new feature, someone creates a Jira ticket, there's a yellow line going down, which is you do a threshold assessment. Maybe you just ask, do you process personal data or no? If someone says no, you close the PI. If someone says yes, PI starts, right? Something like that is typical of companies. I've seen that. What will happen in Privado is, let's take this through, right? So someone builds a new feature, you ask a question, do you process personal data? They say no, you close. There's no PI, you close the threshold assessment and move on. Right now, if that feature actually involved personal data, there's no way you could have picked that up because that was the answer of the engineer or the product people. And sometimes it's, like genuine mistakes. They don't know or they don't understand what you mean by the context of personal data. What will happen with Privado is the moment they start to push this software change, it will automatically trigger a privacy scan and we will verify it. So if we see there is a data element which is involved, if there's none, we'll keep the PI closed. So your number of PIs don't increase. If there is a minor change, instead of opening an assessment, for example, if someone added a cookie, we can just give them a guidance on how to fix that rather than, opening up an assessment. However, if it was a major change, meaning it required it added a lot of third parties, data elements, processing, and it increased the threshold and you had to do the assessment in that case, then it will pre-fill and open a PI. So you still save time in that PI, but it's all automatic. It's all running, like a programmatic. It basically makes it more programmatic and privacy basically gets embedded. So think of Privado as at the design stage, you can do the assessment. At the code stage, there is a scanner running on your behalf and checking everything which is happening and your releases are all compliant. So I'm going to take a pause. I know there was a comment by Jake I know Jake, like you have some experience with working with the engineering team. So thanks for adding that. It makes it more continuous as well. Perfect. And just on the last bit, once you do actually end up adding a code scanning solution like Privado, this is what you also get from a engineering enablement perspective, right? So some sample policies that we can look at and this is where you don't need to do an assessment. So let's say if Privado discovers a new cookie, all we need to tell the engineer is, hey, onboard it to our CMP, which is whatever you use, and make sure the expiry is less than a year. Or if someone adds a new third party, which has never been added to your account, it's like, give me the link to the TPRM assessment done, we have to sign the third party DPA. Are we sending data deletion signal to the third party? Do they have the API or not, right? So basically, all the things we want the product and engineers to do, we are giving them as like a checklist as part of SDLC. Or let's say someone adds a new date of birth or location. So we can recommend them to use age, year of birth, or aggregate location to 2 decimals. So these are all privacy patterns, privacy practices you are anyways recommending, but you're doing it on a design stage when you're running assessments. Privado will do it automatically at the code stage whenever, someone changes a new software and you don't have to chase people. They will get it in their work. I'm going to show you that as well. I know Catherine had a question on GenAI specific feature, lineage tools, etc. I will cover that as well. So yeah, I think 2 use cases. One is if you are using generative AI in your products or if they are getting integrated, one of the things you want to know is from a visibility perspective, what's flowing there, right? So that's super easy in Privado. For example, here is a GenAI product. It has an OpenAI integration. It uses a vector database, which is used only for LLM. And you can very easily see what data is going in there, right? So you have email address, it's being shared with OpenAI and it's going to the database. So you get that visibility, then you can add guardrails for the policy and have the entire lineage and also like open up issues for that as well. So GenAI gets integrated. The other part of GenAI is what I was showing earlier for the processing activity discovery. So this is where we leverage generative AI, large language model to summarize a code repository into a processing activity, right? So like you go to a point where you can actually figure out purpose of processing by just looking at a code scan result in Privado. Perfect. So I'm going to focus on the privacy by design aspect of Privado. So what we looked at was, hey, we can make privacy by design programmatic. The way we do that in Privado is using policy. So we have this policy engine out of the box. We create certain policies. So for example, for the people from California or like who have to comply with CPRA, at the moment you might have in your privacy notice or information like you're only going to share, for example, online identifiers with advertising or marketing third parties, right? And which is a disclosure you're doing on your website. But is this really happening or not is what Privado can ensure. So what we do is we create a policy saying, this is what's allowed and any data flow to any advertising third party beyond this may not be allowing. Another one from a data minimization perspective, let's say in Europe, you're saying that, hey, we have financial data in the company. We want to make sure it's only shared with payment providers. No one else should get our financial data. Then this can be a policy in Privado and we will create issues for that. Or health data, you want to prevent health data sharing. You can create a policy in Privado for that. All these policies are configurable, customizable, out of the box, super easy to configure. The moment we do that, it ends up creating these issues in Privado. So think of this as you do an assessment and that opens up some risk based on people's input. Privado just scans the code, looks at your policies and says, here are all the privacy issues in your product which are live today, right? For example, let's just look at some of them. Here are all about 74 issues which are violating the policy CPRA do not sell or share. An example of it is this. We detected sharing of purchase history with TikTok. And as for the CPRA privacy notice or policy notice on the website, this is wrong. And there's a suggested fix for the engineer. This is what the engineer has to do to fix the privacy issue. And here is a line by line proof. It's basically at this line where you end up sharing purchase data with TikTok. You can see ttq.track. The engineer will get it. They can fix it. And, their life will be easy. We also have integration with Jira. So you can directly send it to them, assign them, and they can just pick it up, right? So from a enablement perspective, not only you are helping the engineer by giving them an issue, giving them a guidance, you're also sending it to their Jira board where they can actually pick it up and fix it. So this was one kind of issue based on a policy, CPRA, do not sell or share. Another kind of policy is, let's say, financial data sharing, right? So it's like, hey, we are not supposed to share financial data to anyone except a payment provider. In this case, it's picking up that you're sharing salary information with SendGrid, and you can see it here, salary, and then, this is where it's going to SendGrid, right? And in this account, actually financial data is being shared with Stripe and Telium and other payment providers, but it's not opening up as issues because those are fine. Those are billing providers. But SendGrid is an email provider. You don't want them to get financial data. Health information sharing, this is another kind of policy. So in this case, illness or medical condition is being shared with Google at Mob, right? So that's another one. So all in all, the issues functionality in Privado is going to help you by converting all the product your engineers have built into actionable issues. These have risks. These can be assigned to engineers and they will fix it. We'll go from a place where you get the visibility, it becomes actionable. And then the last step is looking at new software changes. So what I'm going to do is live demonstrate, take an example and act as an engineer and add a new third party to my code. And what it will happen is it will show you basically the entire workflow of Privado and how we work from a privacy by design perspective. So here's a piece of code which we have already scanned. And I have some code already written here by my engineer. And my goal is to uncomment it so it becomes live. And this is nothing too complex. It's basically supposed to add a new third party called branch, right? And from a privacy by design perspective, we want to make sure if someone adds a new third party or a data element, we have some control, we have some guidance for the engineer. So the only thing I've done here so far is I've acted like an engineer, pushed a new software change. My logic was to add a new third party called branch for attribution, which is like a legitimate use case, but probably the privacy team was never informed. Or even if you were informed, you don't know how it's going to be used. So this is the control you get in software development lifecycle with Privado. As you can see, the moment I made this change, there is a scan of Privado that started running. And as we were chatting, it actually just started a privacy issue saying, hey, we know there's a privacy issue we discovered for Privado. And this is that you've added a new third party called branch.io. This is where you added it. And for the engineer, it's super easy. This is where they spend most of their time. They're not coming to a privacy tool, but where they're spending most of their time, they can actually get guidance right there. So for example, they can see that, hey, you've added a new third party and you have to add a contract, you have to do this, you have to do that. So we're giving them all the guidance in GitHub, in their tools they use day in and day out, right? So I think that was a question by Anuj as well. Like right now in your company, if you're in a privacy team, your security peers are running scanners. 4 to 5 scanners are running to ensure there are no security vulnerabilities going live. Privado takes the same concept, but gives privacy team the final control, visibility, governance in software development lifecycle, saying whenever someone adds a new pixel, we're not going to wait. We're going to get that data immediately. We're going to give engineers the guidance right there and then, so they're not making any mistakes, right? So that's overall the concept of from a privacy by design perspective. I know there are a bunch of questions that I would start taking up now. And if there are any more questions, please. Okay, this is something I answered live. Please feel free to ask here. I'll be on the dashboard for a minute or two or another 5-6 minutes. So if anything interesting or anything, a use case that you have in mind, I can answer those as well. Let me see what's coming up. Okay. So there's this question about digital tracking governance and if Privado can help with that. So yeah, especially if you are from US, FTC has, and even on the California side, there is a big push on figuring out what's kind of the pixels you have and what data flows in, especially if sensitive data ends up flowing, right? So Privado actually helps you with that. Not only will give you visibility on the pixels on your website, but we also tell you the data these pixels take, right? So I'm going to take an example of Storefront. This is basically a website and, someone wrote the code for this and we were able to scan it. And you can see we are able to figure out a flow to Google Tag Manager in this case, what data is going in there, Facebook, what data is going in there, and everything has line by line proofs. So for your engineers to fix it, you can just send them this information, they'll be able to fix it. So from a digital tracking governance, A, you get the inventory of all the pixels and marketing vendors on your website. B, you get the flows of data to these pixels and marketing advertising third parties. And the final advantage is we will set up a policy like CPRA, do not sell or share, and it will not allow a software change to go live if it violates the CPRA policy. So that's how you can do a digital tracking governance project on Privado, and that's a use case as well. Okay, I see there's another question on my health, my data. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so there's a question on like Washington, there's a bill coming up, which is My Health, My Data Act. And, it requires companies, especially if you can infer health data, or maybe if you are a pharmacy, then definitely you have health data to discover and then figure out if that data is being sold, then there are a lot more requirements. So one of the things for My Health, My Data you want to do is work on the visibility side first. What in your application, what are the SDKs? What are the third parties? What's the data you collect? What are the data flows? So again, that's the piece you can do in Privado very easily. Again, what I would do is go to the data element tab and say sensitivity high. And for example, this is consumer health data. This is what you're interested in. And you get a report here, right? Or you can also go in Privado reporting section and say, build me a data flow diagram report for health data, right? And you can just say any health data and it'll create a report for you, and it's just one data element in this case, but you know where the data is going to be stored, shared, all of that. So that's how the first part of My Health, My Data can be done, which is before the deadline, you can get compliant. And I would say, because there is possibility of class action also in the law itself, you should definitely do programmatic privacy governance, right? You should add policies, and whenever an engineer adds a pixel, adds a new health data, there's a new health data flow, Privado will prevent that from going live. So you will not have these breaches. The metapixel breach was the biggest breach, right? You will not have those cases of breaches on your website, on your mobile app, on your backend systems, wherever. So that was another interesting use case that I wanted to talk about. I think with that, that was the last question. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining in. And if there are any follow-up questions, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. We can chat about it more, and have a great rest of the day. Bye everyone.